never leave home without it. I'd just like to start off tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners on whose country we are meeting tonight, and pay my respects to their community and their elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, and this will always be and always was Aboriginal land. I'd also like to pay my respects to the traditional owners on whose country I have been lucky enough to do research for the last 20 years, and also to acknowledge any First Nations people who might be in the audience tonight. So tonight I'm going to talk to you about one of my favourite topics, which is roadkill. I will start off by saying that I'm actually an archaeologist and that I have been using roadkill in my research for about the last 15 years. So roadkill is a quite fascinating topic. When I tell people that I collect roadkill, I usually get a few strange looks. Sometimes they ask me some very, very strange questions. The first thing I'm going to point out is I do not eat roadkill. And I'm here tonight, I'm not in any capacity condoning or suggesting that you should eat roadkill, okay? It's actually illegal. Also, I have a permit to collect roadkill. It's actually illegal to pick up native animal carcasses off the road, no matter what people tell you. And I have a permit to hold and use them for research. But when you think about roadkill, it's a topic that actually a lot of people are quite interested in. I know that in the Northern Territory there is a restaurant, and if you bring in roadkill they will cook it for you, however you'd like. It's in Darwin. There's even some roadkill recipe books, and this was put together by a couple on Kangaroo Island, and it's really a tongue-in-cheek, and they wanted to raise awareness of just how many animals are killed on our roads in Australia. But I put a little snippet down here about gypsy-style echidna baked in clay, and I'd like you to remember that because I'll tell you a little bit about echidnas later on this evening. And over on the left, I have a road guide to roadkill. So there's even one of them, which again, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's really just to raise awareness of the amount of roadkill that's killed on our roads. So I'm going to now start off with a bit of a trivia. I know we had trivia earlier in the night, just to get you in the mood. This is actually one of my favourite games when I'm transversing the roads out in the bush. I like to work out what dead things are on the road. Okay, so I've got an image up here. Does anybody want to hazard a guess of what this is? It is a stick insect. Excellent, you can come out collecting with me anytime. So it's a stick insect, and I actually don't collect these, but I thought this was a really fun image. What about this guy? I drove around Kangaroo Ground for quite a while the other day trying to find roadkill, and I found this guy. What do you think it might be? It is, it's a rabbit. Cool little thing. I actually realised when I was looking through my slides, I don't actually have many pictures of actual roadkill. Like I collect a lot, but I don't really take photos of it. And last but not least, what might this animal be? No, it's not a tree kangaroo or kangaroo. No, it's actually a Tasmanian brush-tailed possum. And I'm actually heading to Tasmania first thing in the morning to collect roadkill. And I am, seriously. But Tasmania I often refer to as the roadkill capital of Australia. I don't know how many of you have noticed the amount of roadkill that you will see in Tasmania. In some ways it's bad. It's obviously bad for the animals that have died, but it's really good indicator too because it tells us that they have a really high, good population of animals living in the state, especially those small to medium-sized mammals like bandicoots and quolls and things that we don't have anymore on the mainland. And that's primarily, of course, because they don't have foxes. But for me, roadkill is a source, it's a really, really good scientific resource. So that's me cutting up an echidna, and some of my students down there drilling into the head of a wallaby. And, I kid you not. And so for me, roadkill has become a fantastic resource for my research. And I'm an archaeologist, as I said before. I have a background in zoology as well, and I've combined those two things to become a zooarchaeologist, as I like to call myself. And no, I don't study ancient zoos. I've been asked that on numerous occasions. What I'm interested in is the history on how people have used animals in Australia. So before we heard, I forgot the associate professor's name that spoke to us in between with the video, Australia has a really unique fauna and flora, an extremely unique, isolated continent, and our animals are really strange. But people have been using animals and interacting with animals for millennia, for generations, 50, 60,000 years. And I'm really interested in how we can look at human behaviour through time via the animals that we find in the archaeological record. And there's a number of ways that we can do that. We can look at the traditional archaeological record, so look at basically what we get out of the ground. So look at animal bones from different hunting sites, occupation sites, to find out what Aboriginal people were hunting and butchering at a certain time and place. We can look at the ethnography, so the early documentation by explorers, settlers, missionaries. This is one of my favourite images. It is of a hunter from the Port Macquarie region in New South Wales, and you can see he's got all this bush tucker slung all over him. He's got echidna, he's got a kangaroo, he's got snakes, a goanna, he's even got a koala. It's one very, very rare image of somebody with a koala early on. This, however, is highly unlikely to have happened. It's totally staged for a number of reasons. So the early photos that we have access to from collections are often, well, mostly staged. The early notes and readings that we have come from white men that have gone out and they've followed Aboriginal men around. They're interested in big game hunting. They will write about kangaroos or emus. They very, very rarely ever document what the women were doing. That's number one, because they weren't interested in women's business. Number two, they weren't allowed to know what Aboriginal women were doing. So it's a very skewed sense of history. Also, early ethnographers didn't spend much time with Aboriginal people, so they might spend a few days, a few weeks, but they certainly were not spending an entire year seeing how things might change through the seasons. And we can also look at how Aboriginal people use and interact with animals today. We know that animals are very important to Aboriginal people. They're part of a real revitalisation of culture. If you think of mutter birding in the Flinders Islands and King Island and places like that. And so we know that they have a really important place from a contemporary point of view. But for me, I look at the archaeology and the ethnography and modern accounts, but I've really become quite interested in experimental data too, and how we can use that to try and interpret the past and also inform on the future. So we've been undertaking this project at La Trobe. It's our native animal bush tucker project, or aka Roadkill project, for a number of years. And so why did I become interested in this? Well, for a long time I did work in southwest Tasmania. So about 15 years ago, I was lucky enough to go and spend a year in Hobart working at the museum, and I was looking at animal bones that were excavated from a cave called Kudakaina. So Kudakaina was rediscovered by geologists in the late 1970s, excavated in 1981 at the height of the damming of the Franklin issue. So archaeologists went down from ANU, dug a very small pit and got thousands and thousands of animal bones out of that pit, very, very well preserved. What was very surprising is when those dates came back, the site was dated between 15 and 20,000 years ago. So for the first time ever, it showed that Aboriginal people were able to penetrate and get into the southwest corner of Tasmania, where it's thought it was too inhospitable. Following this, lots of people went and did research in Tasmania, and we now have a really, really rich record of what people were eating. So lots and lots of animal bone, lots of stone tools. Some of the richest sequences of animal bones anywhere in the world for that time period, that spans from 10 to 20,000 years, 10 to 40,000 years. A really, really fantastic assemblage that spans the last ice age as well. So we look at bones like this, we find things like bone points. People are using animal bones in other ways, cut marks on the bones. But one of the interesting things that I found, so I sat there, looked at 250,000 fragments of bone over about 9 months, documented them all, catalogued them all, found that people in southwest Tasmania were mainly hunting little wallabies. So that wallaby that's sitting over there tonight, my friend that I brought in, that's about on average size that Aboriginal people were hunting. It's a redneck wallaby, or Bennett's wallaby. That one's actually a tamer wallaby, but just pretend it's rednecked. Same size, 12 to 15 kilos. And so, in size, so not a very big wallaby. And what we found is that people were mainly hunting these animals and ignoring lots of others on the landscape. But not only that, when they were bringing these animals back to their cave sites and butchering them, they were butchering them in such a way that only certain body parts were coming back, and that the long bones on these animals, the lower leg bones, were always split open to access their bone marrow cavity. And so what we think was happening is in Ice Age southwest Tasmania, if people were going to eat and mainly focus on wallaby meat, it's really, really lean, and they could actually potentially have starvation, or rabbit starvation, protein poisoning, because they're not getting essential fats in their diets. So what we think people were doing were accessing the marrow to complement their diets with that fat. And this is just a skeletal representation. Basically what I want to show you is that all those black bits, so that's the femur, the thigh bone, here on the wallaby, and down on the tibia, the lower leg, on that guy, this is the main bits that people are bringing back to those caves, and they're always splitting those bones open to get the bone marrow cavity. So what I wanted to know is, okay, I've got all these thousands of bones that I've analysed, but why are they doing this? Are they after the amount of meat? Are they after something else? So I went out and started collecting roadkill. So that was my journey to roadkill. So I went out and collected 4 animals, got some students to come and help me, and we spent a week cutting them up. We weighed and measured every body part. We looked at how much meat, how much fat that you can get off different parts of the carcass, and then we compared it to what we were finding in the record. And what we're finding is that sometimes Aboriginal people were targeting some of those areas that have got lots of meat, but we're ignoring others. So it was a really kind of counterintuitive, I guess. We just thought that they'd be going after the most meat, but it looked like there was something else going on in the minds of those Ice Age hunters. And don't forget, this is going from 10 to 40,000 years, over 30,000 years in these sites in southwest Tasmania. This is what people were doing. It's really, really unexpected, and it actually changed a lot of the arguments where people had to say that Tasmanian Aboriginals were the lowest of the low in terms of cognitive ability. This actually is showing through the animals themselves that people were actually using the landscape, they knew what they were doing, and they were able to survive in an area that white people couldn't. So it became another reason. So if they're not just after the meat, what else are they after? So then I decided to go out and try and look at the nutritional quality as well, not just how much. So I went out and spent a year, I went out numerous times, over a year, and collected different samples from wallaby, fresh wallaby carcasses around Tasmania. So I know where all the best roadkill is in Tasmania, believe me. So I went out, we had these fantastic wire cutter things that were modified for me so I could crush open the bones to get the marrow out really easily. We used to take samples with scalpels, and my favourite, we had this fantastic cordless drill that we used to drill in to get brain tissue out of. And so we collected all this marrow and all these samples and got it analysed. And what we found, this is a fresh wallaby leg, and I know it looks quite gruesome, but a really surprising thing. So up here, this is the bit that attaches to the leg. And I'm going to come over here to this little guy. If it will follow me, yep. So what we've got here is in here is this red marrow. So this red marrow here that I'm showing you in the femur, it's bright red, it's high in saturated fats, and as we move down, it becomes white. This is the good marrow. The best marrow in this animal is coming from the lower leg, where it turns white. This is the marrow that's higher in unsaturated fats, what's better for you. That apparently it tastes better, I've been told, and it keeps you fuller for longer. So this is mimicking the pattern that we're seeing in the archaeological record. And then we surmise from that people are going after that meat, but they're going after the really top quality marrow as well. So then we decided, wow, this works. Well, for this one animal, let's try and extrapolate it to a whole lot of different animals. So we then went out on our journey of roadkill and tried to basically cut up anything we could find. So we've gotten animals from a mixture from Victoria and Tasmania. We've also gotten animals donated to us from the museums as well from their storage, and we've also been collecting seals from the Marine Rescue Unit too. When they wash up, if they don't want them, they'll give them to us. And so over about 5 years at Latrobe, we have gone out the back, out near Law, and basically butchered a whole range of animals. So when I go around the uni and I go to meetings, they look at me and they're like, are you that person? But we have. So we've actually generated a huge amount of data. So we went originally at the start of this project of having some of the most unresearched animals in this way through nutrition and what we call economic utility, looking at the amount of meat, to actually having the best data of any fauna anywhere in the world. So we're quite proud of that. We've looked at a huge range of animals. We've even do things like put them in the slow cooker to get the meat off them and a whole range of fun things. I'm going to tell you a couple of quick examples of my favourites. The emu. So the emu is really rare in Australian archaeological deposits. We don't find many of their bones. However, we do find eggshells, so we know that people were at least targeting their eggs, but we know, talking to modern Aboriginal people, that emu is still highly desired in lots of communities. So it always was this hypothesis, why aren't people hunting emu? What's going on? We know their feathers are desired and other things. So there was a hypothesis that perhaps people didn't break into their long bones because bird bones have spicules, these funny little things in them, that crisscross basically to give them support because they're birds and they're hollow and they used to fly. Anyway, I went out and cut up a couple of emus, and this is a picture down here in the right-hand corner. And what we found is they've got lots of really nutritious red meat, but on the carcass that's readily available is lots of yellow fat. So, and we also looked at their marrow as well, which is high in unsaturated fats, if you were desiring unsaturated fats. But what we think is happening is Aboriginal people in the past were able to go out and get a big lot of meat if they needed it and associated fats and didn't have to bring back the whole bits of the carcass to sites. So that might be one hypothesis for why we're not seeing those bones in the archaeological deposits. My other favourite is the echidna. The echidna is a fantastic animal, I think. When you dissect an echidna and you cut it open, underneath the quills is this huge fat layer. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And it's really high in unsaturated fats, and it's got about 10% of its body weight is actually this fat. Like it's enormous compared to other Australian animals. And if you talk to Aboriginal people today, I reckon 99% of the time that's the number one animal that they'll tell me that they desire. They love the echidna. And this is probably a good reason why. Besides its quills and other things that would have been used, that high fat would have made it extremely delicious. So what was on the menu? A whole range of things. Sometimes, some of the animals are really surprising. So platypus, for instance, we thought would be really fatty and oily. They're not. They're actually really lean, but of course they've got that beautiful pelt. So it's highly probable that's what people were desiring. And also we know that with Europeans, that's what they were after in the 19th century. Things like kangaroos are pretty good, but they're still very lean, like the wallaby. So people, and we know this from archaeological deposits, were getting into the bone marrow. Seals, as you can expect, have got a really big fat layer too, so I'm sure that when they were readily accessible, people would have taken them. And things like shellfish. So we're now extending our project out to go beyond mammals. We've looked at a lot of birds to look at shellfish. Shellfish obviously don't have a lot of fat, but they are really high in important trace elements and other things that you don't find in meat. So very, very varied from our native animal. So what does that say about our own modern diet? And I hesitate to use the word paleo diet, but it's one of those words. I think, and we were talking about this before, with the bushfire crisis, there's been a real surge, I think, in the media and people that I talk to when they want to talk about things like, what can we learn from traditional owners? What can we learn about cultural burning? What can we learn from the past? And I think that this kind of information we can extrapolate to lots of other areas in our lives, including diets. So Aboriginal people obviously were able to survive here quite comfortably in Australia for eons. And of course they ate a wide variety of plants, which are now quite popular in restaurants, but they also ate a real variety of mammals and other animals. And I'm not saying we should all run out and start eating roadkill, and I'm not suggesting we should all tomorrow start eating native animals, but I think we have to rethink our approach to our diets, what we grow in this country, to make it sustainable. Maybe we should start thinking about our national emblems. They've always been here. They're free-ranging, keto, as my friend said tonight, low GI, all those things. So maybe we actually need to bring in that traditional ecological knowledge from our First Nations people and actually start looking at what they were doing to rethink our own future. So thank you.
Jillian, we'll take a few questions. Please don't ask, does it taste like chicken?
I haven't actually eaten any of them.
Any questions? I'll start. Yeah, we'll take one over there.
As far as sustainable farming goes, do you think this is a realistic future for us?
Is this a realistic future for sustainable farming?
I don't know. It's a really hard one because I understand the ethics and the morals, and I even though I collect roadkill, I don't like to see animals harmed, and I don't like to see what goes on. I don't know is the answer, but I think it's something we have to work towards. I actually think what we should probably be eating is insects. Insects are extremely nutritious. No one's actually really done any research on Australian insects and Aboriginal use of them, and I think that's an area that definitely needs to be looked at. But I think it's something we need to think about. How we approach this, I'm not really sure. I mean, nobody wants to see kangaroos and emus farmed or echidnas. I love echidnas, but I mean, it's, without making a joke, I mean, it's something that we do need to think about though, because we can't keep going the way that we're going with the animals that we brought into this country, the way in which we're using them. Like, it's just not sustainable.
We'll take another question. Yep.
In Canada right now, there's some programs where if you hit an animal and you call the police and then you get quick enough, able to take it to a First Nations community. Is there anything like that in Australia for food?
So in Canada, if an animal gets hit, you call the cops?
Yeah, and they will take it to the First Nations community who will then eat it.
And they'll take it somewhere where it will be consumed?
No, the answer to that is no. I know, and it changes from state to state, but in Victoria it's what the legislation I'm most aware of, and it doesn't happen. I know now some Indigenous communities have just gotten rights to get access to kangaroo culls so that they can actually use that meat just to feed their dogs, because they were distressed at seeing the amount of waste. And I know now that some groups, including Wurundjeri in Melbourne, have just been given access to possums that are being culled. Previously, what was happening is they were having to buy possum skins to make their cloaks from New Zealand at $50 a piece. Now, instead of all those animals that are being culled being wasted, they're actually getting used to them, but not in terms of eating, no.
Not yet. We'll take one last question before we wrap up.
Is that because of the risk of like illness coming from roadkill and things like that? It's been there for too long, or?
Are we not eating roadkill because of the risk of illness?
No, like, yeah, is that why we not?
Why are we not eating roadkill? I think it's a question.
Australian animals do have quite unique nematodes and other things in them and parasites, so you do have to be careful of that. I mean, with the kangaroo market, those animals are supposed to be quite regulated and go through a lot of health checks. I guess, I mean, there are people that do eat roadkill, okay? I mean, I have met a few, and they seem okay, but I mean, you have to be careful. But you have to be careful.
Is that why we're not doing like what Canada is?
No, I think it's slow bureaucracy, to be honest. I don't think it's because of that. I think they're just very, very slow off the mark, to be honest. It's taken Wurundjeri and other groups years and years to be able to get access to pelts. So I think it's, red tape.
Great. Thank you so much. Let's put our hands together.